Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumburger channel. This is of course the show where we dive into weird, unusual albums that are out there, you know. So today, I have for you one of the most absurd records I've ever come across. You know, this isn't one that... This doesn't just deconstruct rock and roll, like, it says it does, but it's more like this album guts rock and roll like a fish. It then spills those insides all over the kitchen counter, and then it gets a hammer and smashes it to pieces. And then throws it into the microwave for a bit, why not? Like, this record is ridiculous, I feel. And like so many records on this record label, we'll talk a bit about the label as well, it just feels incredibly unclassifiable and completely ridiculous. And so, today I present to you the absurdly named, bear with me as I try this, Ruryk, Gusset, Giblet, Brian, Giblet, Brian, Gusset, Ruryk, Giblet, Brian, Gusset, Ruryk, Giblet, by Giblet, Ruryk, Brian, Gusset, Gusset, Giblet, Brian, Gusset, Brian, Gusset, Ruryk. What a mouthful. So, this is just bonkers, right? Like, I don't actually know where to begin. Everything about this is ridiculous, from the band name, to the album name, which I mentioned here is an extreme composite of the band members' names, to the content, to the artwork, to the physical format of this album actually is ridiculous as well. Like, everything about this album is crazy. Right. So, try say this one along with me if you can. Who are Giblet, Ruryk, Brian, Gusset, Ruryk, Gusset, Giblet, Brian, Gusset, Ruryk, Brian, Gusset, Ruryk? Well, this project, this is a collaborative project made up of members Giblet Gusset and Brian Ruryk. And so to start with, Giblet Gusset. Giblet Gusset is an experimental musician from Fleetwood, UK, who describes themselves on Bandcamp as unprocessed voice, action, movement, drums, film, junk, tapes. Pretty good, right? And then Brian Ruryk, on the other hand, is a guitarist from Toronto, Ontario, who describe themselves as poor judgment in acoustics since 1982. And so, both artists have their own, angle of experiment. They like to take their experimentation down, right? Gusset seems to really explore the capabilities of the human voice and how it could be stretched into these really weird, uncomfortable, twisted positions and performances, while Ruryk seemed to actually explore similar concepts, albeit through the guitar rather than the human voice. And so, the combination of both of these artists, it creates some incredibly unhinged music, where the typical rules of, conventions of music composition, they are just completely ignored in favor of just free-form abstractions, And then actually, arguably not even so, to be fair. Like, this comes across as some of the most absurd improvisational music, I've ever come across. At least I assume it's improvisational. With it being this really weirdly brilliant album that's completely unlistenable in, conventional senses, and yet it's truly fascinating. Like, I find myself consistently coming back to this for more and more for some reason, despite it being so crazy, so ridiculously unhinged. And so how do you dissect this album into a tangible review, right? I'm genuinely not too sure. Like, this album, arguably, if anything, it actually does too much. It becomes a complete overload of absurd bombardment of noises. It doesn't, like I said, it doesn't just deconstruct rock and roll, but it's a complete I feel like this is actually a complete deconstruction of the notion of deconstruction itself, if that makes sense. Like when people say, yeah, I'm deconstructing rock and roll, and they just do weird things with it, this is like they're deconstructing that process, and then deconstructing that process as well. It just goes further and further the more you think about it. Like, I genuinely cannot fathom any coherent thought into this. I mean, as well, I can't actually go into the song by song, of course. Like, each song on this is just this overloading attack of guitars and noise and stuff, and it just goes like all sorts happening. There's at least two I can mention, though. We'll get into that later, though. Each track, though, of whose names are weird amalgamations of the letters of the two artists' names, they're consistently shifting, bastardizations of rock and noise tropes. Like, it's all there. There's chords, there's shredding, solos, drum fill, big bands and sinister ambience and such, and there's triumphant screams you'd hear at the end of a song or following a hook or something, right? All these, things that are relevant in music, but in here it's being presented in, none of it has been, I don't know how to say here it's being presented. I mean, none of it is being presented in a tangible and understandable way. None of it at all. It has completely brutalized it all into this completely demented and depraved expression that is impossible to really comprehend, I feel. But it is interesting, though, as you actually arguably get moments of respite, arguably, when the artists simply decide to just take that craziness and just send it down another avenue where it deconstructs it all in a different and frankly rather insane manner again. It's basically an experience of the completely unexpected where I doubt anybody will be able to predict what is going to be coming around the corner once you're thrown towards the corner. So yeah, it's genuinely hard to talk about these songs individually as much as I would actually like to. There's, like I said earlier, there are two tracks we can discuss briefly though, as they're the shortest tracks, and they're both named after the artists. It essentially shows us the two artists deconstructing their own methods for this particular album, and the contribution each artist offers to the overall experience, right? Simple enough stuff, solo works basically. Except, we've been tricked here by the two artists, Track 7, Giblet Gusset, is a weird experimentation on the guitar, which is, as we've learnt, is Brian Ruryck's contributions, while track 8, Brian Ruryk, is a weird vocalization experiment, which is Giblet Gusset's contributions. And so, yeah, we're purposely being sent down the wrong paths here. Everything is meant to confuse us and throw us off course and, lead us down the wrong path intentionally. It's baffling and crazy, but to be fair, there's something really hysterical about the whole project and concept of itself, if that makes sense. It's certainly a unique expression of notions, albeit one that is just, oddly funny with its constant bombardment of noises. Yeah, it's so funny because, just to quickly go back to it, when I first listened to this album, I didn't realise that they'd actually, swapped the names around for the two solo tracks until I actually went and properly listened to it all. Maybe they confused us all, actually, and maybe they actually are solo tracks by the actual artist they're named after. I don't even know. Let's not confuse ourselves. And so, why has an album like this been released? Well, we can attempt to find an answer by looking no further than the absurdly esoteric record label who put out this album on cassette, the UK tape label Steep Gloss, a label specifically specialising in collaborative works of all things sound art, dada, abstract, conceptual, sinister, delirious, melancholy, unclassifiable, bewildering, dislocating, etc. And so after exploring this label, and actually finding so many albums I want to talk about, Steep Gloss is essentially, essentially releases the most outside of music. If you can even call it music, they're projects that can't even be strictly classified as sound art projects because they arguably do more than that in some cases, or in some other cases less than that, and or not even at all. it's like we're getting the most buried underground music here, I feel. Stuff that is purposely completely inaccessible and purely to be consumed by the most maddened of music lovers, right? And speaking of Steep Gloss and their release of this album, the physical release for this album is also something worth mentioning, you know. We're incredibly fortunate, you know, much like with Fault Records, to be given a gallery of images of the cassette on Steep Gloss as it was released. And so whilst the actual plastic case and album art of this album is somewhat normal on some level, right? This album was actually released inside a cut-up, scrawled and inked burlap wrap with a copper piece, turning it into this absurdly esoteric art piece that looks so weird. Like, I look at the photos and all I can think of is how itchy and scratchy, uncomfortable that sack looks to touch. Like, it's got this really horrible, nasty physical presence to it and how it looks, and it's so weird, right? So weird. There's something brilliant about it as well, though, because it's this perfect physical representation of everything being unfolded on the album. It's stuff to make you uncomfortable. So, with that, I think we're just going to come to the end of Weird Music today. I think this is going to be one of the, a somewhat short episode, but I really wanted to discuss this one, you know, because this album confused the heck out of me and left me without words. I was battered, confused, but I found it hysterical at the same time. This album is so weird and funny in its own right, I feel. Such a strange, bewildering experience that I genuinely can't compare to anything tangible. Except, there's one thing this album made me feel like. When I listened to, the first few tracks, all I can think of is like a compilation of cartoon chases and fights, It's so weird. No, it's this album, pure untethered artistic expression of unclassifiable noises. What an experience, I'll say here though, I do feel like there's this whole shit posting element to the album, this whole trolling element, which is purposeful, it's intended, and that's funny in my eyes, it's funny, like people making music to be as inaccessible as possible. And as well though, this album did give me a lot to think about, hence why I wanted to talk about it on the show. I don't think I've done it any justice, truth be told, but I'm not sure I ever could. Something like this, I don't think I ever could. And so in any case, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music. I do hope to cover some more albums from Steep Gloss in future episodes if I can somehow find a way to comprehend my thoughts into words. We'll have to see, of course. For now though, I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. I wish you all the best, take care, and bye bye for now. Bye bye!